Chair, can you put your mic on?
Oh, I'm sorry. So welcome to the work session of Tuesday, May 5th. And for the purposes of the audio, we have the full complement of the Board of Commissioners. So we're under board and leadership communication right now. We're talking about on the business agenda under item 3, presentation. We're going to start with reading the equity statement, okay? So hopefully everyone has the copy of the statement. I'll be reading the first 3 paragraphs. Then together we read the next paragraph. Then it goes Commissioner Treese, Commissioner Schouten, Commissioner Rogers, Commissioner Willie, and then we're done. Do you need a copy, Commissioner? Could someone take my sheets and make a copy for Commissioner Schouten? Does anyone else?
I'd like one
Commissioner
too.
Treese and Commissioner Willie. You have yours?
I could pull it up online.
I'd like a hard copy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It doesn't go away.
Okay, then the other thing, there are a couple things on our formal agenda I want to make sure we're all clear on. Our formal agenda did have more changes than our update published. We have an added set of minutes, so there are 2 sets of minutes. We have 2 bid award memos that have been included, and as the notice published, item G has been pulled from the consent agenda. And then, Alan, why don't you just take us through the emergency ordinance now so that we get everybody clear on that?
Okay, Madam Chair, yes, I do have to apologize. I had scheduled a work session time to talk about this, and then, of course, some negotiations that got rearranged, and so the work session got moved to after the meeting. But that would do you very little good. And I didn't catch that, so I apologize. But it's relatively straightforward. I handed out all to you the track change version of the ordinance. As you can see, it just changed one word from 14 to 30. So that's all we're doing. And it's an emergency ordinance. And the emergency ordinance procedures in the charter provide that you can have a first reading and then adopt the ordinance, and then have the public hearing, and then adopt the ordinance, and then the ordinance becomes effective immediately. And so typically, we have a first reading, then 14-day wait, and a second reading, and then a public hearing. So this sort of condenses that down into one meeting and allows the ordinance to be effective immediately. And then a little bit later in your actual board meeting, you'll have an action item that extends the emergency declaration to, I think, June 26th. So it's a very simple process, and I'm here to answer any questions about it.
So I have a question in terms of order and expediency. So will we be needing to have a motion to read the ordinance by title only?
That's correct. So you'll first have a motion to read by title ordinance that just requires a voice vote.
Yep.
And then you'll open the public hearing.
Yep.
And then you will vote on it, which requires a roll call vote, and to be effective, it has to be a unanimous vote.
Yep.
After you.
Yep, so we'll do the ordinance part, and then the actual putting it into effect will be later on the agenda.
Right. Then a little bit later on, you're going to have the action item that adopts the proposed extension of the emergency declaration.
Sometimes for expediency, we move things up. Do you want to do that?
I do.
So we'll probably.
Okay, so you can do that immediately after the public hearing.
Yep,
Okay, great.
yeah.
I have two things, Alan. One, I'm taking just an onslaught of calls and emails, and the reason I'm getting them is that I think there's some confusion, so if you could do 2 things I think might be important. One,
You need to move your mic.
Yeah, there you
yeah,
go.
one issue that you could emphasize again is that this is a governor's issue. There's nothing we can do. There's a lot of people out there who think that somehow this board can unilaterally make decisions, and we can't. So that's number one. And then there's number 2, there's really confusion about what our emergency ordinance does. And I remember all of us questioned when we first saw it what the implications were. And it waives certain purchasing rules. It allows us, obviously, to get federal funds and some other things. So is there a way you could kind of have some preemptive kind of discussion so that people understand that we don't have some kind of power that we really don't?
Certainly, would you like me to do that in the ordinance presentation or on the action item?
Both for me, but I don't care one or the other. I don't.
I can do it.
nobody else is-
Okay, in the ordinance, I'll talk about what the emergency declaration does and
Yeah, I think
our
on the
powers and what
ordinance would
the
be
actual
best.
governor does, and
But
you're absolutely
the other
right.
thing too, to clarify, is our emergency ordinance only applies to the urban unincorporated areas as well. Or, no, excuse me, the unincorporated areas. It doesn't apply to the cities.
That's correct.
So,
I think that's good too. Dementia,
yeah.
yeah, I like that.
And the actual orders for stay home, save lives, and other things are statewide. And I think that's, if Alan doesn't clarify that, either I or we can.
Please, yeah, I think a lot of people think that somehow we can do something different.
Yep,
We weren't elected to violate law.
yep, yep. Okay, so back to normal board communication then. Who would like to go first? Not that we have anything different than all COVID all the time.
Well, yeah, I'll start just by saying I don't really have anything, so.
And I'll go next and say the same thing.
Commissioner
Well,
Wall.
I have two things then, so I'll make up for one of you there. Yesterday, we had a Fair Board meeting with the primary item for discussion on the agenda was whether or not we're going to have a fair this year. Leah Perkins Hagel did a good job of giving us an update on what many of the other fairs are doing through July, and August is still in question, but for the most part, the state fair is still in question. I guess they're going to make that decision next week. But for the most part, there wasn't any good reason. Brad attended as the legal rep in the audience. There wasn't any reason why we should have the fair. There was a lot of downside and very, very little upside. So the Fair Board voted yesterday to cancel the fair for July 2020. We are working with some of the FFA and 4-H groups because those kids have been working on having their animals ready for the fair for a year or maybe longer than that. So they are considering what they call a virtual showing. And I don't know exactly how that works, but stay tuned. And we may, the Fair Board is supportive of helping them financially a little bit. It's not going to be very much money, but we have some budgeted already that was going to be spent. So helping them put that presentation on. So stay tuned for that, and I'll certainly keep you up to date. But for right now, the next fair will be July 2021.
I'm looking forward to the appointment of a new Fair Board member coming before us soon. I know we've got.
I hadn't seen anything on that. That's right, we did have one who resigned, didn't we? Yes. Okay.
So I have a question. So this was the first year that we were going to a full
10-day fair.
10-day fair, and we're not going to be doing anything. What about the budget implications of that?
That's what we're going to be working with Jack and Leah. I have asked Leah to put together a revised projection of what the rest of this fiscal year ending June 30th looks like, because remember, we have the fair in July, but we incur a lot of expenses in June, so it kind of drops off the table, and then we pick up the new budget. So it's really difficult to track all of that. But so Leah is going to do a revised financial projection for June 30 this year, and then working with Jack to do a revised budget number for 2021.
So I have two more questions too, sorry.
Okay.
Number one, what about our vendors? I assume that there's been upfront communication with them about this.
Yeah, there's been a lot of communication with all the vendors.
Why don't we get a full report from Leah?
Yeah.
About that?
But the reason why we had to make this decision now was because we had to sign vendor agreements by June 1. So
Right.
that was the critical part of the timing of this board meeting and this decision. So, yeah, there's been lots and lots of
And
communication.
when are we going to get the full report?
I don't know, we'll have to talk to Leah. Get it on the rolling agenda.
Mr. Rhodes, if you could help us get that?
And the other thing is, I had an orthodontist that actually, whose office is about 4 blocks from here, reach out to me last week. She was going to have to delay the opening, the reopening of her office because she couldn't, she did not have sufficient PPE. So I've been communicating with Marnie, but I also reached out to John Southgate. He knew of Brian Guinea at Oregon. And he sent me an entire list of masks, of providers of masks, face shields, gowns, and other products that you might need to do that. If I would send that to you, since this did come from a known good source, Steve, would it be possible we put that someplace on our website so people could have access of where they get that?
We'll have to make sure that we work that through our legal staff so that we are not promoting a particular vendor.
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of different ones. It's 6 of one, 5 of another, and 2 different ones for gowns. And so it's a good variety. But yes, we'll need to confirm what we're doing here. But I just was, it took me 3 or 4 days to finally track down some information. It's too bad she had to delay her opening by 2 weeks just because she didn't have the proper equipment to do that. So, and I see Alex over there. He said he'll touch on that during his part. So that's all I have.
Anything else, commissioners?
Couple of things from me. One, tomorrow, Pam, I don't know if you're going to be on that call, but we have the WSI meeting, virtual, of course. Diane, I was talking to some folks at Nike yesterday, and they're making PPE equipment as well, as we know. And I told them we were, and they said they were well aware, and they were well aware of what you all were doing. So it was nice to hear that. I'm sure you're all getting them. I'm starting to get all my calls from the cities asking where their cut of the 104 million is, and I've politely said that's actually said I don't know that you ought to get a direct cut. There ought to be some way to spread funds over population centers, and we had a nice conversation. I suspect there'll be more.
So for the full context on both of those things, Work Systems, Inc. has been doing marvelous things during this COVID crisis. I know we haven't gotten a report out on that here, but if you simply look at their website, you can see how they have been provided sources of funding, some directly through Washington County, some through the state, some through philanthropy, to help ensure that, for example, nonprofits who are not used to doing their work entirely virtually have the equipment that they need, have the income stream to keep folks employed, that additional training resources are available, particularly for folks who find themselves now unemployed. On the second thing that Commissioner Rogers is mentioning, as you know, we've just started a work group. He and I are part of that, along with senior leadership staff, to try and put together a framework. We hope to have that here, a draft for your first review in work session next week. So before the legislation ink was dry on the paper, Commissioner Callaway was asking for the Hillsborough cut of the 104 million, and it's, as we know, we're the ones that are going to be held accountable to be audited to make sure things follow the rules. So we're going to, as a board, go through that information in the public eye, in the open air, so all have the benefit of seeing that. So we're working on that. A couple of things I wanted to mention. On Friday, the governor held a press conference and later in the day released the prerequisites for reopening Oregon for phase 1. So we now have more clarity, or I wouldn't say absolute clarity, but more clarity about what counties and health regions need to do in order to reopen through phase 1. Related to that, we'd heard the few days before that that the governor's office was planning on having calls with all county commissions. We are at the tail end of that process for the various health regions. So on Friday afternoon, we've all received a calendar appointment for that afternoon phone call. It's just an hour meeting. It's with all 6 county commissions as well as the hospitals to hear from the governor's office on this.
What are those 6 counties again?
Sure.
Obviously, the 3.
It's the 3 plus Clatsop, Columbia, and Tillamook.
Thank you.
So to finish, we, our 3 counties, our CAOs, operating officers, our staff, the 3 chairs, have been working to try and ensure that our individual plans come through a regional framework, yes. Now, it appears is going to need to be wider. So we're trying to sync up with the chairs of the other 3 counties in advance of the Friday meeting so that we've sort of got the collaboration going. It will likely take another couple of weeks to complete the framework and all the prerequisites. You all have that documentation because I made sure that you had received it. So if you have any questions on the prerequisites, we can go over that with our staff as well. And I think we're going to be hearing more about the reopening framework in a bit as well. So those are the 2 things I wanted to mention. Anything else? Phew. I know I find it a real pleasure to be away somewhat from COVID over the weekend, and then on Monday morning, it's back to the weekly shock of, oh yeah, we got to problem solve through this COVID stuff again. All righty, so without further ado, why don't we move into the COVID, oh wait, leadership communication. I did it again. Mr. Rhodes.
Most of what I was going to say has already been mentioned, so thank you. But I will just reiterate, we're doing 2 reopening plans. We're doing an external plan, which I think you'll hear about today, and then we're working on an internal plan as well, which we hope to come back next week with that information for you. So we have to be like a business and listen to what the countywide plan says and then do our internal plan following that.
Internal meaning the agency as an employer.
Yes, this operation, yes. And so we're kind of in sync putting those together and we'll have something for the board on that. I think next week is what the goal is.
Great. Diane? Mike, is your mic on?
On the table, there should be a goldenrod sheet, and there's some interesting things going on with the weather, so we're beginning to create pre-plans, and I thought Mark Jockers could come and brief the board.
Chair, members of the board, thank you very much. We put this together in part in response to a question from Commissioner Willie 2 weeks ago, which is, it's been awfully dry this spring. What's happening at Hague Lake? Hague Lake is filled on something called a rule curve, where they try to maintain water in there so that on May 1st, it is 100% full. We've had a very, very dry spring this year, and we did not hit that fill curve, the Bureau of Reclamation and Tualatin Valley Irrigation District. We're about 96% of it, which is very, very good, but there is still the possibility that if additional rains don't come toward the end of this month, that there may be some cutbacks associated to the amount of water that's available for Clean Water Services to put in the river to restore flow in the summer. The other organization that would take a cut in that situation as well is the Tualatin Valley Irrigation District. We don't see that as being a particularly big problem. We think we can manage our way through this. The other source of our water that we use to restore flow into the Tualatin is Barney Reservoir. Barney Reservoir is 100% full. To give you context, 2001 was kind of the worst year that we ever had. And in that year, on May 1st, the reservoir was 54% full. So this is very, very different. It's 96% full right now, but we just wanted to make sure that the board was cognizant of that issue.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate this.
So the team is already pre-planning what we need to do and putting measures in place, and it's really the double drought that causes a significant issue in the region. So hopefully rain will start soon, both later in the spring here and in the fall. The second item is Clean Water Services. It's pre-planning. We call it de-escalation, so we're going from our level 4 response and getting the team ready and the building ready to what we call the level 3 response. So we're going to maintain the alternative shifts that we have, the folks working 24/7 and our field operations folks working on to maintain their physical distancing plans. But right now the team is getting ready and preparing the building. So we're still conducting our development reviews and our development meetings remotely, so we're able to serve our customers still, and we're responding to customer calls. So we're still, I think the team mentioned yesterday, they feel like they're in a stable mode of operations, given sort of this new reality that we're in. And then you received an email from Mark Jockers regarding our wastewater surveillance work, and it's very interesting. So that research is paying dividends. We're part of this global consortium, part of a nationwide consortium, and now we're working on the regional and local consortiums. So I think it will help us understand what's going on, and as we have our, hopefully one day, herd immunity in the community spread. So that's what we're keeping our eye on. Thank you.
Alan, did you have anything more?
Nothing more.
Okay, great. Well, are we sick of COVID yet? Guess what? It doesn't matter. It's here, whether we like it or not. So, but here today, as usual, is Marnie Kyle and some other folks who will keep us up to speed on the latest and greatest as we manage through life with COVID.
Good morning, Chair Harrington and Board. This morning I'm going to be relatively brief because I have a presentation at 10 that will focus on the reopening plan that's being drafted. So just to give you a heads up, we are drafting a plan, and the hope is that we'll get you a final plan for your review. I'm shooting for May 8th, which is Friday, so that on Tuesday the 12th, you would be prepared to consider approval of the plan.
I have a question.
Sure.
You're going to describe a draft plan during our business meeting?
Yes.
And we won't have seen, we'll get the final plan on Friday to adopt on Tuesday.
Yes, so what I'm doing at the business meeting is really a high level to give you the outline of what you'll be seeing in the plan, and trying to provide some reassurance to you and to our community that we are working on a plan for reopening Washington County. So it sounds like you have concerns.
I want to make sure that the board has the opportunity for good in-depth discussion of a draft plan before we have to be on point for adopting it on a Tuesday. That's my point.
So I think that,
To Commissioner Rogers'
I think it's
point,
fair.
we do have lots of incoming emails
yeah.
and calls that we're getting and whatnot. And
So I think the plan for the plan is to get you something Friday the 8th so that you'll have some time to review it. And then during work session on the 12th, that would be time for conversation to answer questions. We are trying to be, I mean, we don't have to bring it on the 12th.
let's be mindful that it may get delayed
Yeah,
from
yes.
the May 12th agenda.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say, is that we don't have to adopt it on the 12th. We just feel that there's a lot of, I guess, pressure to have a plan in place so that when the governor does lift her restrictions, that our community feels that Washington County is ready to go and that we have a plan.
Yeah, we have to go through the process together. The other
Yes.
thing we want to be mindful of is that we know we need to work on this as a region as well.
Yes, yes, and that is happening, yes.
That has to be stepped into the plan.
Yes. So we are definitely working regionally with the public health region. So, so just for today's update on numbers, we've had 5 new positives since yesterday. So we're hovering around, this number is a little lower, which is a good sign, but it's one day. We've been hovering between 7 and 10 new cases per day. A couple of new points that we're adding to our data. One is I've added number of tests since the last report. So each day we'll have an idea of the number of tests that have been performed in Washington County. So since yesterday's report, there's been 252 new tests. So that brings us to a total of 9,649 tests cumulative. And then we also, the total number of deaths has increased by 1. We're up to 12 now, and for 114 hospitalizations. So a couple of things around a couple of other updates around the data. One is we expect that this week we'll be providing the data by zip code on our website, on the Washington County COVID website. And that's happening in synced regionally, so that's why it's been a little bit delayed, because we're doing it with Multnomah and Clackamas County. So we have our data ready to go. The state has provided data also by regions, so they're just working on getting that onto the website and making sure that there's some important language around what the data means and hopefully minimizing any potential of stigmatizing certain communities based on the data. That's been a concern of ours.
Thank you for doing that, because the Marion County website, when you look at the graphs, doesn't have any narrative.
Right.
It's just, poof, here's the stark data.
Yeah, and that's a little bit of the delay because, as always, we try to, because, especially because of the known disproportionate impact on communities of color, we've been working on the narrative and we ask for their input before we add that narrative to the regional website. So that process takes a little bit more time than just plunking data on a website. So the other thing that's new on our report, on our daily report, is we continue to have the outbreak report, so long-term care outbreaks, adult foster homes, and we have a new category now that's called non-long-term care workplace outbreak. And right now we have 15 of those. And just to give you an idea, 33% of the 15 are in a category that's agricultural food processing facility or warehouse. We have 27% are restaurant, 13% office settings, and then we have one of each of a different sort of smattering of local businesses. And all 15 of them were closed for at least 28 days during the outbreak since the last person was symptomatic. So because of the closures, the businesses have been closed, but people are still associated with that business.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that?
Yes.
So the information on that, will it be just 15 in this category of non-long-term care outbreaks? Or will it be broken down in terms of the inclusive categories that you mentioned?
Yeah, right now, when I received it, it was just 15 in that category. Yeah, I'm just sharing because I anticipated if I said we have 15 non-long-term care, you'd say, well, what kind? So, and I know there's a lot of concern because of some of the, like meat packing outbreaks that have been happening in other regions. So that's why I wanted to give you an idea of what we're
I
looking
did
at.
find the examples helpful, though,
Yeah.
because the long phrase of non-long-term care.
Yes.
I had trouble getting my head around that. So
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, so there's going to be a lot of changes. The other thing is I've asked our epidemiologists, and I know that they're working on it regionally. You've heard about the prerequisite or the gating criteria that has been finalized by the governor's office. And so I've asked our epidemiologists to help me to understand at what level that will be monitored and how we're going to report that data, because that data becomes more important than number of cases and number of tests. So we will be shifting, we'll probably be adding to what we're reporting. And we are also working on some kind of a visual display. I'm not sure exactly what that'll look like. A lot of good minds are trying to wrap their heads around what can we put on the website to help our citizens and residents look at, well, where are we in this data around reopening?
Yeah, not my job to micromanage. I am a little concerned about that kind of generic, nondescript kind of, it's not this, as opposed to actually breaking it out in a couple of categories. I'm just really concerned about the farm workers and the field condition situation.
Yes.
And to put it in a few words, I don't want that to become our meatpacking
Right.
spike.
Yes, and we are working really closely with Virginia Garcia, Salud, and our WIC program, and the Western Washington Farm Workers Association to prevent that. And the good news is OHA did put out guidelines yesterday, so that means that there's a little bit more, it makes it a little bit easier for us as we're working with the farm workers and with the owners to say these are the guidelines that need to be followed. We didn't wait for those guidelines to begin working with the farm owners and the nurseries and the farm workers. We've been doing that for, I think, about a month now. Time's flying
my
by,
understand- I mean,
so,
I know Leda Garside for a long time, and
yes,
she brings some nice overlapping skill sets all in one individual,
Yes.
and she cares a lot. But I am concerned about that, and I know that it's going to probably be, I'm going to guess, a combination of carrots and sticks. I mean, I think there's going to need to be some mandatory rules, but I think people are going to need some help too,
yes,
to be able to do this financially. Some of these operations and farms there's not a lot of profit there, and people are being hit with unexpected expenses. I think we need to help where we can,
yes.
but carrots and sticks is sort of, the classic cliche that may apply here.
Yeah, and the plan includes everything from helping the farm owners with housing, to making sure that there's adequate hand washing stations and restrooms in the field, that there's face coverings for the workers, that there's an adequate number of face coverings for the workers. We've already, because of the difficulty and delay in getting face coverings, we've already put in an order through the EOC logistics unit to get those. And we're working, Centro Cultural is a very strong partner, Virginia Garcia, Salud. So really, there's been a consortium that's worked with the farm workers for, I don't know, maybe 50 years in this county. And so we're really relying on that those strong relationships and thinking about, well, what is the county's role and how do we support the owners? Because, yes, some of them, it is a thin margin, and others can contribute, I
Yes.
think, to the,
Just one last follow-up. Is Vienna Star involved in any of these discussions?
yes,
Okay.
yes. Yep, sorry, I always forget them, so thank you for reminding me. So the other thing I just wanted to remind that non-emergency medical services, like dental services, were just opened on May 1st. So in this right now, our guidance from OHA isn't allowing us to support some of the dental care, oral health offices that you had, brought to our attention. And OHA is working with the Dental Association because they generously donated a lot of their face coverings, their N95 and surgical masks, to the healthcare systems when it was needed. And now they are able to reopen, but they don't have the personal protective equipment to do that. So we're aware of that and concerned about it because, like all of you, we're concerned about local businesses, and access to dental care is really important. So we don't want to see any of those businesses go under because they can't reopen. So we're working with OHA and following that closely. The PPE issue is just a very fascinating issue that we're monitoring and working on. The other thing I just wanted to...
I'm glad you chose the positive word fascinating because I find it aggravating.
Well, it's, I think it's like everything else. There's some data and there's some emotion. And it all gets stirred in there together, so that makes it fascinating.
I'm sure our businesses would appreciate your terminology, but certainly, I really, it was an interesting kind of little mini journey for me, and I appreciate you responding back to me. I knew you were really busy, and so, yeah, I'm hoping we can confirm this list and really make that public information. I don't know what their turnaround time is, but I do know, as I said, this orthodontist had delay by 2 weeks.
Yeah, and if you send me that list, I can share it with the logistics, and they can get it up on our EOC website as well, which is where a lot of the businesses go. So,
Okay.
yeah. And then the last thing, I guess, and I'm happy to answer any questions, is just wanted to point out that we had a pretty successful press event last week on the large Latinx disparity, and we did a lot of follow-up interviews, especially with Spanish-speaking radio and Univision, so that was pretty successful. And then we also had yesterday some press interest on contact tracing, and they highlighted all of the different news stations, highlighted Washington County and what we're doing to prepare for contact tracing, and some pretty good visuals, because that's a hard thing because we're calling people on the phone, so it's not, made for TV excitement, but I think that they did a really nice job getting that information out and showing a little, glimpse into the world of contact tracing. So I think that was shared with you this morning, so hopefully you'll get a chance to look at that. And This is proof that we're working on that reopening plan. It's 23 pages now, so it may get delayed, but we were just shooting for at least giving you the opportunity to think about it on May 12th.
Commissioner Treese?
I just have a quick comment, and that is that I noticed on social media yesterday that our first identified positive case was released from OHSU yesterday, and it was quite a party with a mariachi band and all sorts of things up there. So that's, to me, a good news story.
Yes, it's very good news, and I know our staff really became attached to the family, and it was emotional for our staff too, because they really became a close, trusted source with the family.
I have one thing. On the way in today, I was hearing, and I think it was Trish in your department, talking about a statewide plan to test certain people throughout the next 6 months to a year. And she was calling for volunteers in Washington County to participate. Can you may not be aware of that, but because I can see the look on your face, but yeah.
Right, it was,
So how would one sign up for that if you have?
well, I guess my wrinkled face, and I'll check with Tricia before, but my reaction, yes, I'm aware of OHSU has a research study where they are going to be doing some targeted testing as well as active surveillance. My understanding was that OHSU was going to do, because it's going to be random sampling, and so my understanding is OHSU will be sending out letters randomly across the entire state. And then they'll be also doing some active surveillance. So I haven't seen the full study plan, but I don't think that it's a matter of us saying, do you want to volunteer? So she may have been talking about something else, so I can double check on that.
And I don't know the details
Yeah.
of this. I was just listening to it, and they were saying, and she was on there speaking on behalf of Washington County, saying that they're looking for volunteers to participate in the program, and so.
Okay, I will double
people
check
out
what
would want
she was talking about. I know she was talking about some contact tracing, and there is going to be some asymptomatic testing as well. So I'll follow up with Tricia before the 10 o'clock. Yeah. Any other?
We also have an update on the Small Business Assistance Program.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. For the record, Alex Vidal. Wanted to, sorry, I catch my breath here. Wanted to share with you that I'm happy to report that 102 grants have been processed, and the money has gone out to the small businesses of the community. The transfers were made either through wire or paper checks, so there's still a few paper checks in the mail. We had budgeted for 100 grants at $3,000 each. Two corporate donors provided $3,000 each. That was Corvo and Northwest Natural, so we were able to provide 102 grants. Wanted to provide you a little bit more background on the selection process, and so based on advice that we received from our CDFI partner, the work group agreed that a 50% set aside for historically disadvantaged populations would be a good target, and so that's what we used. And so the first half of every of the slots that were available for each type of aid were set aside for folks who were from a racial ethnic minority, were immigrants, were LGBTQI, were veterans, or women, or disabled. And so we also noticed, I provided some information about our initial applications and the demographics of those. We realized that by looking through the data, that there were a lot of businesses whose owners appeared to have names who were traditionally women's names or feminine names. And so what we did for the grants, the 102 grants, is we looked through the names and identified names that could potentially be women-owned businesses, and had MISO actually verify with the businesses that they were in fact women-owned, and so that significantly boosted our numbers for the grants. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that with the applications because there was just too many applications to do that with. So out of the 1,652 final unique eligible applications, 1,594 requested a grant. So by far, that was the most popular form of aid that people were seeking. Just to give you some of the highlights. And then after we did our initial selection process, we also looked at the list and we verified the actual GIS location of the businesses. A lot of the businesses had put in that they were in Beaverton or actually the city of Portland, when in fact they were in unincorporated Washington County. So we were able to verify their actual location, which again boosted the numbers for unincorporated Washington County. Some highlights from once we selected businesses and looked at their geographic location, we also looked at their employee counts. The work group agreed that they were reasonably aligned with the actual distribution of businesses by geography and employee count throughout the county, so it aligned well. So the law of large numbers and using a lottery helped us arrive at a final result that matched the community's distribution. So a few highlights from the demographics. 65% of the grants went to women-owned businesses, so that were 66 grants. 53% of the grants went to minority-owned businesses, that's 54 grants. We also, and the largest demographic in terms of minorities was Asian American businesses at 32% of the grants. And so what we did, we were very happy with the results in terms of making sure that the word got out to those, particularly those that had a language barrier, have had significant impacts due to COVID and being negatively associated with COVID, the Asian American community. Some other highlights, 96% of the grants went to businesses that have less than $1 million in gross revenue. So again, we were targeting the smallest businesses, the most vulnerable, that have had the hardest time getting access to other resources. We also, 90% of the grants went to businesses with less than 10 employees. Again, that mirrors the actual distribution of businesses in the county in terms of employee count. We had a very high number of sole proprietor grants that we provided, again, tracking with the fact that a lot of sole proprietors were left out of the federal aid package. By industry, the highest industry was professional services, followed by other was a category that folks chose, and then personal services, so barbers, dry cleaners, salons, a lot of the places that are closed because of close contact. Food services was also in the top 4. So 73% of the grants went to those 4 industries. The next one down would be retail, had 9% of the grants. Construction, 8% of the grants, and then adult or child care, 7% of the grants, so 7 grants. By geography, 33% of the grants went to businesses in unincorporated Washington County, rural and urban. 31% went to businesses in Beaverton, and that closely aligns with the actual distribution of small businesses. That's something to keep in mind, that Beaverton has the highest number of small businesses out of all the cities. 18% went to Hillsborough, 6% to Tigard, 6% to Tualatin, 2% to Forest Grove, 2% to Sherwood, and then 1 each for Banks, Cornelius, and Durham. So those are the highlights from the results of our grant selection process. We're still processing the loans, and so we'll have the results of that coming in the next couple weeks as the loans get processed. We're very excited about the work that we've been doing. We're hoping to share this information with the community now that we've had a chance to share it with the board, and be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I just want to say thank you very much for the follow-up and that comprehensive analysis of the range of businesses that received assistance through the grants. Really appreciate your thoroughness in all of this.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I've been impressed with the outcome. It's been outstanding. Just out of curiosity, other than money, I know you're going to say money, is there any disappointments or issues that you've seen in there that need to be tweaked a little bit if we have another round?
Sure. So we are learning as we go and hoping to apply what we learn to any future rounds that we might be able to put together. The messages that we've received either through email or phone call that were upset about not being selected or the selection process, we're in about the 8 to 12 range, a dozen or so. So relatively small, surprisingly. There was an example of somebody who was selected for a grant who contacted us and let us know that business had picked up and that they wanted to share the grant with another business. So it's very, very, very touching. The other recipients that had received a Hillsborough grant, for example, also let us know and were very gracious that they would happy to share that their grant with someone else. So it's been a kind of a community building exercise. There's been interest from some donors about potentially helping with moving this program forward. And we've also applied for a grant with the Oregon Community Foundation, so we're waiting to hear back from them. So hoping to potentially put together a package to do perhaps some more funding. And then we're also going to look at the difference between grants, small loans, and large loans, and looking at what is most impactful, most helpful, which form of aid, and that way we can adjust how much we might put forward in those categories. So we're learning as we go, and it's mostly been positive. Obviously, there's some that also goes to our communications. We want to share and celebrate these stories, but we want to be very careful because there is a lot of need out there, a lot of unmet need, and we want to make sure that we're communicating in a way that is respectful of the fact that this is a crisis and a lot of people out there are hurting, and we don't want to offend folks.
Commissioner Treese?
Oh, I'd just like to thank Alex for all the work that you've done. And also, I think when you asked the question, Commissioner Rogers, about would there be any changes, every time we have a meeting, we talk about the things that we did right, the things that we would like to tweak a little bit. And one of the pieces that we learned is that I believe it's in Tualatin, they're doing an algorithm in relationship to, instead of a lottery draw. And so we're looking at that as a potential opportunity. But when I reflect back on where we were at the very beginning and kind of faced with this, we really did work well together to make sure that we were improving along the way and really looking critically at the steps that we took, taking in the commissioners' response to the potential and making sure we were addressing your issues as well as trying to meet the needs of the community. So again, I'd like to thank the whole team, but I especially want to thank Alex for the really intense diagnostic work about where we were actually focusing these dollars and trying to meet the spirit of this commission in relationship to addressing our community needs.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Willie?
and just to add to that, I think one of the things that, one of the outcomes of this was the collaboration that came about with all of the other cities and their economic development departments in coordination with John Southgate. They talk a lot about how to actually roll their programs out. I mean, Tualatin and Tigard and Beaverton and Hillsborough, all of them talked about what they learned, lessons learned as each one of them went through this process. And so for the county to be a part of those conversations, I think is a real collaboration step. That was one of those intangibles that we hadn't anticipated, but certainly was the outcome of this. So kudos to Alex and certainly to John for reaching out and trying to not only learn on the fly, but to gather as much information from others as possible along the way. So good job on that.
Madam Chair and members of the Commission, thank you so much. Also, Commissioner Willie's comment sparked something. Beaverton is holding a second round of grants, and so just wanted to provide a plug for the Beaverton program. We're working together, as Commissioner Willie said, as much as we can, and we've posted information about Beaverton's program on our website, so that folks that are in Beaverton that were not able to take advantage, that were not selected for a grant from our program, have an opportunity to apply to that program as well.
Yeah, thanks for the good staff work. Alex, I've been very impressed with what you've been doing, and I know John Southgate for a long time and really appreciate his knowledge and passion on this. I know he played his role. And also a shout out to our lead commissioners. Thank you so much for making us all look good and for your great work. I don't think I've heard as much about this. What about follow-up in terms of success or companies that still go under? Are we going to do some follow-up in terms of how what we did makes a meaningful difference for those who did get extended grants and loans?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Scouten, thank you for the question. We are still working on plans for follow-up and next steps, and so we're chugging along as we go. But right now, with our limited human resources,
Right.
that's not something that we're able to do right now, but possibly in the future.
Yeah, I wonder if we can probably get a lot of help, well, hopefully get some help from our micro lenders on that.
Absolutely, Madam Chair and Commissioner Scouten. So one of the things that MISO, who's the provider that issued the grants, they were able to verify a lot of information from the grant recipients. So for example, one recipient was unable to provide official documentation that verified some of the information that they had provided. So they were disqualified and another recipient was selected. So they're doing a great job of due diligence with the grants. And then with the loans, obviously, there's an underwriting process, and so there's a lot of accountability there as
Right.
well. So, again, continuing to build in best practices as much as we can, so that we have a successful program, and it's better with each iteration as we move forward.
And to your question, Commissioner Scouten, it's our intent to make sure that we do follow up and see what the results were of this, both for public testimony for potential, but also so that we know how successful the implementation of the grant program was, even if it's a simple survey to find out how they're doing. But there's certainly that intent. The group is now focused on the loan piece, and then when we have a timeline that we have to meet there. But at the end of that, we will be able to look for an evaluation process. So thank you.
And another opportunity that we'll be talking about more next week will be coming about with the CARES Act additional funding. It may be possible for there to be another round, and this is where having the scoping of what proportion, what's qualifying at a gross level, what the unmet need is, because we could take a portion of that funding and allocate it to another round. We'll hear more about significant other unmet needs for rental assistance, for housing, and also clarify what other sources are addressing other aspects like food and so forth. So we'll probably need an hour on the agenda next week to go over that draft framework, have a good discussion, and then go from there. So, great.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Commissioners.
Job well done.
And I don't want to take full credit. Aaron Doyle's done a great job, Chris Defenbach, the whole team. So it's a team effort.
That's right. All right, the next item on our work session agenda is an executive session pursuant to ORS 192.660 sub 2 sub D. We have a motion and a second to go into executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0. If we could have all members of the public and members of the staff who are not directly associated with this item. And given